Section 4 of the Conjure Woman. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by James K. White. Section 4 of the Conjure Woman by Charles Waddell Chesnutt. The Conjurer's Revenge. Sunday was sometimes a rather dull day at our place. In the morning, when the weather was pleasant, my wife and I would drive to town, a distance of about 5 miles, to attend the church of our choice. The afternoons we spent at home, for the most part occupying ourselves with the newspapers and magazines, and the contents of a fairly good library. We had a piano in the house, on which my wife played with skill and feeling. I possessed a passable baritone voice, and could accompany myself indifferently well when my wife was not by to assist me. When these resources failed us, we were apt to find it a little dull. One Sunday afternoon in early spring, the balmy spring of North Carolina, when the air is in that ideal balance between heat and cold where one wishes it could always remain, my wife and I were seated on the front piazza, she wearily but conscientiously plowing through a missionary report, while I followed the impossible career of the blonde heroine of a rudimentary novel. I had thrown the book aside in disgust, when I saw Julius coming through the yard, under the spreading elms which were already in full leaf. He wore his Sunday clothes, and advanced with a dignity of movement quite different from his week day slouch. "Have a seat, Julius," I said, pointing to an empty rocking chair. "No, thanky, boss. I'll just sit here on the top step." "Oh, no, Uncle Julius," exclaimed Annie. "Take this chair. You will find it much more comfortable." The old man grinned in appreciation of her solicitude, and seated himself somewhat awkwardly. "Julius," I remarked, "I am thinking of setting out scuppernong vines on that sand hill where the 3 persimmon trees are. And while I'm working there, I think I'll plant watermelons between the vines, and get a little something to pay for my first year's work. The new railroad will be finished by the middle of summer, and I can ship the melons north, and get a good price for them." "If you're going to have any mo' plowing to do," replied Julius, "I 'spect you'll have to buy another creetur, 'cause it's much as dem hosses can do to 'tend to the work dey got now." "Yes, I had thought of that. I think I'll get a mule. A mule can do more work, and doesn't require as much attention as a horse." "I wouldn't 'vise you to buy no mule," remarked Julius, with a shake of his head. "Why not?" "Well, you may 'low it's all foolishness, but if I was in yo' place I wouldn't buy no mule." "But that isn't a reason. What objection have you to a mule?" "Fac' is," continued the old man in a serious tone, "I don't lack ter drive a mule. I's alluz feared I mought be imposin' on some human creetur. Eve'y time I cuts a mule wid a hick'ry, 'pears ter me mos' lackly I's cuttin' some er my own relations, er somebody else w'at can't he'p deyselves." "What put such an absurd idea into your head?" I asked. My question was followed by a short silence, during which Julius seemed engaged in a mental struggle. "I don' know ez it's wuth w'ile ter tell you dis," he said at length. "I don' hardly 'spec' fer you ter believe it. Does you 'member dat club footed man w'at helt de hoss fer you de udder day, w'en you 'uz gittin' out er de rockaway down ter Mars Archie McMillan's sto'?" "Yes, I believe I do remember seeing a club footed man there." "Did you eber see a club footed nigger befo' er sence?" "No, I can't remember that I ever saw a club footed colored man," I replied after a moment's reflection. "You and Miss Annie wouldn' wanter b'lieve me ef I wuz ter 'low dat dat man wuz oncet a mule." "No," I replied, "I don't think it very likely that you could make us believe it." "Why, Uncle Julius," said Annie severely, "what ridiculous nonsense!" This reception of the old man's statement reduced him to silence, and it required some diplomacy on my part to induce him to vouchsafe an explanation. The prospect of a long, dull afternoon was not alluring, and I was glad to have the monotony of Sabbath quite relieved by a plantation legend. "When I was a young man," began Julius, when I had finally prevailed upon him to tell us the story, "dat club-footed nigger, his name is Primus, used to belong to ole Mars Jim McGee over on the Lumberton Plank Road. I used to go over there to see a woman w'at lived on the plantation. That's how I come to know all about it. Dis yer Primus was de liveliest hand on de place, alluz a dancin' en drinkin' en runnin' roun' en singin' en pickin' de banjo. 'Cep'n once in a while, w'en he'd 'low he wa'n't treated right 'bout somethin' er nudder, he'd git so sulky en stubborn dat de w'ite folks couldn't hardly do nuffin wid him. It was 'gin de rules fer any er de hands to go 'way fum de plantation at night, but Primus didn't min' de rules, en went w'en he felt lack it, en de w'ite folks p'ten' lack dey didn't know it, fer Primus was dangerous w'en he got in dem stubborn spells, en they'd ruther not fool wid him. One night, in de spring er de year, Primus slip' off from de plantation en went down on de Wim'l'ton Road to a dance gun by some er de free niggers down dere. Dey wuz a fiddle en a banjo en a jug gwine roun' on de outside, en Primus sung en danced till 'long 'bout 2 o'clock in de mawnin', w'en he start fer home. As he come along back, he tuk a nigh cut 'cross de cotton fields en 'long by de edge er de mineral spring swamp, so as to git shut er de patter rollers w'at rid up en down de big road fer ter keep de darkies from runnin' roun' nights. Primus was santerin' 'long studyin' 'bout de good time he'd had wid de gals, w'en as he was gone by a fence conder, w'at should he hear but somethin' grunt. He stopped a minute ter listen, en he heard somethin' grunt ag'in. Den he went ober ter de fence whar he heard de fuss, en dere layin' in de fence conder, on a pile er pine straw, he seed a fine, fat shote. Primus look' hard at de shote, en den started home. But somehow er udder he couldn't git away fum dat shote. W'en he tuk one step for'ards wid one foot, de udder foot 'peared ter take 2 steps backards, en so he kep' natchully gittin' closeter en closeter ter de shote. It wuz de beatenis' thing. De shote des 'peared ter charm Primus, en fus' thing you know, Primus foun' hisse'f way up de road wid de shote on his back. Ef Primus had 'a knowed whose shote dat wuz, he'd 'a' managed ter git pas' it somehow er nudder. As it happen', de shote b'long' to a cunjuh man w'at live' down in de free nigger settlement. Co'se, de cunjuh man didn' hab ter wuk his roots but a little while 'fo' he foun' out who tuk his shote, en den de trouble begun. One mawnin', a day er so later, en befo' he got de shote eat up, Primus didn' go ter wuk w'en de horn blow, en w'en de oberseer went ter look fer 'im, dey wa'n't no trace er Primus ter be 'skivered nowhere. W'en he didn' come back in a day er so mo', eve'ybody on de plantation 'lowed he'd run away. His marster advertise' 'im in de papers, en offered a big reward fer 'im. De nigger ketchers fotch out de dogs en track 'im down ter de edge er de swamp, en den de scent gun out, en dat wuz de las' anybody seed er Primus fer a long, long time. 2 er 3 weeks atter Primus disappear', his marster went ter town one Sunday. Mars Jim was standin' in front er Sandy Campbell's bar room up by de ole waggin yard, w'en a po' w'ite man fum down on de Wim'l'ton Road come up to 'im en ax' 'im kinder keerliss lack ef he didn' wanter buy a mule. 'I don' know,' says Mars Jim, 'it 'pen's on de mule, en on de price. Whar is de mule?' 'Des roun' here, back er ole Tom McAllister's sto',' says de po' w'ite man. 'I reckon I'll hab a look at de mule,' says Mars Jim, 'en ef it suit me, I don' know but w'at I mought buy 'im.' So de po' w'ite man tuk Mars Jim roun' back er de sto', en dere stood a monst'us fine mule. W'en de mule see Mars Jim, he gun a whinny, des lack he knowed 'im befo'. Mars Jim look at de mule, en de mule 'peared ter be soun' en strong. Mars Jim 'lowed dey 'peared ter be somethin' familious 'bout de mule's face, 'speshly his eyes, but he hadn' los' na'er mule, en didn' hab no recommemb'ance er havin' seen de mule befo'. He ax' de po' buckarah whar he got de mule, en de po' buckra say his bruh raised de mule down on Rockfish Creek. Mars Jim was a little suspicious of seeing a po' white man with such a fine creature, but he finally 'greed to give de man $50 fer de mule, 'bout half w'at a good mule was wuth dem days. He tied de mule behind de buggy w'en he went home, en put 'im to plowin' cotton de nex' day. De mule done mighty well fer 3 or 4 days, en den de niggers 'mence' ter notice some quare things about him. Dey was a meadow on de plantation where dey used ter put de hosses en mules ter pasture. Hit was fenced off fum de cornfiel on one side, but on de other side er de pasture was a tobacco patch w'at wa'n't fenced off, 'ca'se de beastises done none of 'em eat tobacky. Dey don't know w'at's good. Tobacker is lack religion. De good Lawd made it fer people, en dey ain' no other creature w'at kin 'preciate it. De darkies noticed dat de fus' thing de new mule done, w'en he was turnt into de pasture, was ter make fer de tobacco patch. Co'se dey didn' think nuffin on it, but nex' mawnin', w'en dey went ter ketch 'im, dey 'skivered dat he'd eat up 2 whole rows of tobacco plants. Atter dat dey had ter put a halt on 'im, en tie 'im ter a stake, or e'se dey wouldn't 'a' be'n na'er a leaf er tobacky lef' in de patch. Anudder day, one er de hands, name' Dolphus, hitched a mule up en drive up here ter de vimya'd. Dat wuz w'en ole Mars Dugal' owned dis place. Mars Dugal' had kilt a yearlin', en de neighbor w'ite folks all sont ober fer ter git some fresh meat, en Mars Jim had sont Dolphus fer some too. Dey wuz a wine press in de yard where Dolphus lef de mule standin', en right in front er de press dey wuz a tub er grape juice, des pressed out, en a little to one side a barrel 'bout half full er wine w'at had be'n standin' 2 or 3 days, en had begun ter git sorter sharp ter de taste. Dey wuz a couple er boards on top er dis yer barrel, wid a rock laid on 'em ter hol' 'em down. Ez I wuz sayin', Dolphus lef de mule standin' in de yard, en went inter de smoke house fer ter git de beef. Bimeby, w'en he come out, he seed de mule a staggerin' 'bout de yard, en 'fo' Dolphus could git dere ter fin' out w'at wuz de matter, de mule fell right ober on his side en lay dere des lack he wuz dead. All de niggers 'bout de house run out dere fer ter see w'at wuz de matter. Some say de mule had de colic, some say one thing en some anudder, 'tel bimeby one er de hands seed de top wuz off er de barrel en run en looked in. "'Fo' de Lawd,' he say, 'dat mule drunk, he be'n drinkin' de wine.' En sho' 'nuff de mule had passed right by de tub er fresh grape juice, en pushed de cover off'n de barrel, en drunk 2 or 3 gallon er de wine w'at had be'n standin' long enough fer ter begin ter git sharp. De darkies all made a great 'miration 'bout de mule gittin' drunk. Dey never hadn't seen nuffin lack it in dey bawn days. Dey po'd water ober de mule en tried ter sober 'im up, but it wa'n't no use, en Dolphus had ter take de beef home on his back, en leave de mule dere 'tel he slep' off his spree. I don't 'member whe'r I tol' you er not, but w'en Primus disappear' fum de plantation, he lef' a wife behin' 'im, a monst'us good lookin' yeller gal name' Sally. W'en Primus had be'n gone a mont' er so, Sally 'mence' fer ter git lonesome, en tuk up wid anudder young man name' Dan, w'at b'long on de same plantation. One day dis yer Dan tuk de new mule out in de cotton fiel' fer ter plow, en w'en dey wuz gone 'long de turn row, who should he meet but dis yer Sally. Dan look' roun' en he didn' see de oberseer nowhar, so he stop a minute fer ter run on wid Sally. "'Howdy, honey,' sez he. 'How you feelin' dis mawnin'?' "'Fus' rate,' 'spon' Sally. Dey wuz lookin' at one anudder, en dey didn' na'er one of 'em pay no attention ter de mule, who had tu'nt his head roun' en wuz lookin' at Sally ez ha'd ez he could, en stretchin' his neck en raisin' his years, en whinin' kinder sof' to hisse'f. "'Yas, honey,' 'lows Dan, 'en you gwine ter feel fus' rate long ez you sticks ter me. Fer I's a better man dan dat low down runaway nigger Primus dat you be'n wastin' yo' time wid.' Dan had let go de plow hander, en had put his arm roun' Sally, en wuz des gwine ter kiss her, w'en sump'n ketch 'im by de scruff er de neck en flung 'im way ober in de cotton patch. W'en he pick' hisse'f up, Sally had gone kittin' down de turn row, en de mule wuz standin' dere lookin' ez ca'm en peaceful ez a sunny mawnin'. Fust, Dan had 'lowed it was de oberseer w'at had kotch him wastin' his time, but dey wa'n't no oberseer in sight, so he 'cluded it must 'a' be'n de mule. So he pitched into de mule en lammed him ez hard ez he could. De mule tuk it all, en 'peared ter be ez humble ez a mule could be. But w'en dey wuz makin' de turn at de een er de row, one er de plough lines got under de mule's hind leg. Dan retched down ter git de line out, sorter careless like, w'en de mule haul off en kick 'im clean ober de fence into a brier patch on de udder side. Dan wuz mighty sore fum his wounds en scratches, en wuz laid up fer 2 er 3 days. One night de new mule got out in de pastur' en went down ter de quarters. Dan wuz layin' dere on his pallet w'en he heard somethin' bangin' away at de side er his cabin. He raise' up on one shoulder en look' roun', w'en w'at should he see but de new mule's head stickin' in de winder, wid his lips drawed back over his toofs, grinnin' en snappin' at Dan des like he wanter eat 'im up. Den de mule went roun' ter de do' en kicked away like he wanter break de do' down, till bimeby somebody come 'long en drive 'im back ter de pastur'. W'en Sally come in a little later fum de big house, whar she'd be'n waitin' on de w'ite folks, she foun' po' Dan nigh 'bout dead, he wuz so skeered. She 'lowed Dan had had de nightmare, but w'en dey look at de do', dey seed de marks er de mule's huffs, so dey couldn't be no mistake 'bout w'at had happen'. Co'se de niggers tole dey marster 'bout de mule's gwines on. Fus' he didn' pay no 'tention to it, but atter a w'ile he tole 'em ef dey didn' stop dey foolishness, he gwine tie some of 'em up. So atter dat dey didn' say nuffin mo' ter dey marster, but dey kep' on noticin' de mule's queer ways des de same. 'Long 'bout de middle er de summer, dey wuz a big camp meetin' broke out down on de Wim'l'ton Road, en nigh 'bout all de po' w'ite folks en free niggers in de settlement got 'ligion. En lo en behold, 'mongst 'em wuz de cunjuh man w'at owned de shote w'at charm Primus. Dis cunjuh man wuz a Guinea nigger, en befo' he wuz sot free had useter belong to a gentleman down in Sampson County. De cunjuh man say his daddy wuz a king, governor, er some sort er whatchamacallem, way ober yonder in Africa, where de niggers come fum, befo' he wuz stowed away en sol' ter de speculators. De cunjuh man had he'ped his marster out in some trouble er nudder wid his goopher, en his marster had sot 'im free en bought 'im a trac' er lan' down on de Wim'l'ton Road. He purten' ter be a cow doctor, but eve'ybody knowed w'at he r'ally wuz. De cunjuh man hadn' mo'n come th'oo good befo' he wuz tuk sick wid a cole w'at he cotch kneelin' on de groun' so long at de mo'ners' bench. It kep' gittin' wusser en wusser, en bimeby de rheumatiz tuk holt of 'im en drawed 'em all up, till one day he sont word up ter Mars Jim McGee's plantation, en ax Pete, de nigger w'at tuk keer er de mules, fer ter come down dere dat night en fetch dat mule w'at his marster had bought fum de po' w'ite man durin' de summer. Pete didn' know w'at de cunjuh man wuz drivin' at, but he didn' dast ter stay away, en so dat night, w'en he'd done eat his bacon en his hoe cake, en drunk his molasses en water, he put a bridle on de mule en rid 'im down ter de cunjuh man's cabin. W'en he got ter de do', he lit en hitch de mule, en den knocks at de do'. He felt mighty jubous 'bout gwine in, but he wuz obleeged ter do it. He knowed he couldn't he'p hisse'f. "Pull de string," says a weak voice, en w'en Pete lif' de latch en went in, de cunjuh man wuz layin' on de bed, lookin' pale en weak, like he didn' have much longer fer ter lib. "Is you fotch de mule?" says he. Pete say yes, en de cunjuh man kep' on. "Brer Pete," says he, "I's be'n a monst'us sinner, man, en I's done a pile er wickedness in doin' er my days, but de good Lawd has wash my sins away, en I feels now dat I's boun' fer de kingdom. En I feels, too, dat I ain' gwine ter git up fum dis bed no mo' in dis worl', en I wants ter undo some er de harm I done. En dat's de reason, Brer Pete, I sont fer you ter fetch dat mule down here. You 'member dat shote I was up to yo' plantation 'quirin' 'bout las' June?" "Yas," says Brer Pete, "I 'member yo' axin' 'bout a shote you had los'." "I dunno whetter you eber l'arnt it er no," says de cunjuh man, "but I done knowed yo' marster's Primus had tuk de shote,
and I was bound to get even with him. So one night I caught him down by the swamp on his way to a candy pulling, and I throwed a goofer mixture on him and turned him to a mule, and got a poor white man to sell the mule, and we divided the money. But I don't want to die till I turn Brer Primus back again."
Then the conjure man asked Pete to take down 1 or 2 gourds off in the shelf in the corner and 1 or 2 bottles with some kind of mixture in 'em, and set 'em on a stool by the bed, and then he asked him to fetch the mule in. When the mule come in the door, he gin a snort and started for the bed, just like he was going to jump on it.
"Hol' on there, Brer Primus,"
the conjure man hollered.
"I's monstrous weak, and if you commence on me, you won't never have no chance for to get turned back no mo'."
The mule seed the sense of that, and stood still. Then the conjure man took the gourds and bottles and meant to work the roots and yerbs, and the mule meant to turn back to a man. First his ears, then the rest of his head, then his shoulders and arms. All the time the conjure man kept on working his roots, and Pete and Primus could see he was getting weaker and weaker all the time.
"Brer Pete," says he by and by, "gimme a drink of them bitters out'n that green bottle on the shelf yonder. I's gone fast, and it'll gimme strength fer to finish dis work."
Brer Pete look up on the mantelpiece, and he see the bottle in the corner. It was so dark in the cabin he couldn't tell where it was a green bottle or no. But he hilt the bottle to the conjure man's mouth, and he took a big mouthful. He hadn't mo' than swallowed it 'fore he 'mence to holler.
"You gimme de wrong bottle, Brer Pete. Dis yer bottle's got pizen in it, and I's done fer dis time, sho'. Hol' me up fer de Lawd's sake, till I get th'oo turnin' Brer Primus back."
So Pete hilt him up, and he kept on working the roots, till he got the goopher all took off'n Brer Primus 'ceptin' 1 foot. He hadn't got dis foot mo' d'n half turnt back befo' his strengt gun out entirely, and he drapped the roots and fell back on the bed.
"I can't do no mo' fer you, Brer Primus," says he, "but I hopes you will forgive me fer what harm I done you. I knows de good Lawd done forgive me, and I hope to meet you bofe in glory. I sees de good angels waitin' fer me up yonder wid a long white robe and a starry crown, and I'm on my way to join 'em."
And so the conjure man died, and Pete and Primus went back to the plantation. The darkies all made a great 'miration when Primus come back. Mars Jim let on like he didn't believe the tale the 2 niggers told. He says Primus had run away, and stayed till he got tired of the swamps, and then come back on 'em to be fed. He tried to account for the shape of Primus's foot by saying Primus got his foot smashed, a snake bit or somethin', whilst he was away, and then stayed out in the woods where he couldn't get it cured up straight, 'stead of comin' 'long home where a doctor could 'a' tended to it. But the niggers all noticed the marster didn't tie Primus up, ner take on much 'cause the mule was gone. So they 'lowed their marster must 'a' had his suspicions 'bout dat conjure man. My wife had listened to Julius's recital with only a mild interest. When the old man had finished it, she remarked, "That story does not appeal to me, Uncle Julius, and is not up to your usual mark. It isn't pathetic. It has no moral that I can discover, and I can't see why you should tell it. In fact, it seems to me like nonsense." The old man looked puzzled as well as pained. He had not pleased the lady, and he did not seem to understand why. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said reproachfully, "if you don't like dat tale. I can't make out what you means by some of dem words you uses, but I'm tellin' nuffin but de trufe. Co'se I didn't see de conjure man turn 'im back, fer I wasn't dere, but I be'n hearin' de tale fer 25 years, en I ain' got no 'casion fer to 'spute it. Dey's so many things a body knows is lies, dat dey ain' no use gwine roun' findin' fault wid tales dat mought des ez well be so ez not. Fer instance, dere's a young nigger gone ter school in town, en he come out here de yuther day en 'lowed dat de sun stood still en de earth turnt roun' eve'y day on a kinder axle-tree. I tole dat young nigger ef he didn't take hisse'f away wid dem lies, I'd take a buggy trace ter 'im. Fer I sees de earth standin' still all de time, and I sees the sun going around it, and if a man can't believe what he sees, I can't see no use in living. Might's well die and be where we can't see nothing. And another thing what proves the tale about this old Primus is the way he goes on if anybody asks him how he come by that club foot. I asked him one day, mighty polite and civil, and he called me a old fool and got so mad he ain't spoke to me since. It's monstrous queer. But this is a queer world, any way you could fix it, concluded the old man with a weary sigh. If you makes up your mind not to buy that mule, sir, he added as he rose to go, I knows a man what's got a good hoss he wants to sell. Leastways, that's what I heerd. I'm going to prayer meeting tonight, and I'm going right by the man's house, and if you'd like to take a look at the hoss, I'll ax him to fetch him round. Oh, yes, I said, you can ask him to stop in if he is passing. There will be no harm in looking at the horse, though I rather think I shall buy a mule. Early next morning the man brought the horse up to the vineyard. At that time I was not a very good judge of horse flesh. The horse appeared sound and gentle, and, as the owner assured me, had no bad habits. The man wanted a large price for the horse, but finally agreed to accept a much smaller sum, upon payment of which I became possessed of a very fine-looking animal. But alas for the deceitfulness of appearances! I soon ascertained that the horse was blind in one eye, and that the sight of the other was very defective, and not a month elapsed before my purchase developed most of the diseases that horseflesh is heir to, and a more worthless, broken-winded, spavined quadruped never disgraced the noble name of horse. After worrying through 2 or 3 months of life, he expired one night in a fit of the colic. I replaced him with a mule, and Julius henceforth had to take his chances of driving some metamorphosed unfortunate. Circumstances that afterwards came to my knowledge created in my mind a strong suspicion that Julius may have played a more than unconscious part in this transaction. Among other significant facts was his appearance, the Sunday following the purchase of the horse, in a new suit of store clothes, which I had seen displayed in the window of Mr. Solomon Cohen's store on my last visit to town, and had remarked on account of their striking originality of cut and pattern. As I had not recently paid Julius any money, and as he had no property to mortgage, I was driven to conjecture to account for his possession of the means to buy the clothes. Of course I would not charge him with duplicity unless I could prove it, at least to a moral certainty, but for a long time afterwards I took his advice only in small doses and with great discrimination. End of The Conjurer's Revenge. Recording by James K. White, Chula Vista.